Welcome everybody to Sioux Falls, South Dakota and Carnegie Town Hall for our 4 o'clock informational with your City Council. First order of business is for open discussion. Do I see any open discussion? Okay, seeing none, I do have one because as most of you know, I was gone last week on a little trip to Washington, D.C. to support the F-35 fighters to bring the F-35 fighters to the 114th Fighter Wing out at Joe Foss Field on our Air National Guard. I'm going to give a real quick report on that. Then I'm going to ask Mark Lee to just give us a little bit about his impressions of it too, because Mark was the instigator and the guy who ran the whole thing. But we got in and on Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning we went to Capitol Hill for a tour, then met with Senator John Thune, talked to him about, of course, the F-35s, a number of other issues. From there, lunch, and then Representative Christy Nome, we had a number of questions to ask her also, and of course promoted the F-35s. That afternoon later on, then we met with our last senator, Mike Rounds, who again gave us a little update of what's going on around the Senate and Washington, D.C. And then we were back to our hotel for a free night. Thursday, we were up early and at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce for an update of economic conditions, a lot of different things along those lines from the Chamber's perspective. Then we started splitting up. Some went to we all went to the Pentagon, I should say. Some went to Major General Scott Van Ham's office. He was a former CO out at Ellsworth Air Force Base. Some of you may or may not know, we did this trip in conjunction with Rapid City. And so we had a number of delegates from Rapid City. There are people from Rapid City there also. And then I went to see Major General Brian Neal, who has some direct relationship to the F-35. We presented him with some information that he was not aware of, and we're hoping that he will pass that up the line as fast as he can. We then all had at different times Pentagon tours. Very interesting. If you haven't been in the Pentagon, you get a chance to go there sometime. Plan on spending quite a bit of time because there were like 700 miles of hallway or something like that there. It's not that much. It's quite a bit, let's put it that way. There was more hallway there than I wanted to walk in one day, let's put it that way. And anyway, then I had the pleasure of going with Ron Milkey and R.J. Clift, retired generals in the Air Force, and Major General Reich from the Army from South Dakota, to visit some people at what they call the Air National Guard Readiness Center, which is where they do all the work for the Air National Guard. We talked to the people the CO there about some different things, again, having to do with the F-35 project. Then we had a nice dinner and headed home. So it's about what I wanted to let you know that we worked hard. We were all plenty bush by the end of it. But Mark, would you like to add something to that?
Thank you, Councilor Mark Lee with the Sioux Falls Area Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for the invitation. Part of the reason for this trip was that we learned some time ago that Rapid City had established a tradition of doing a DC fly-in, and it stemmed a little bit from their experience with the base realignment and closure activity that was so prominent a few years ago, in which Sioux Falls actually supported Rapid City in their attempts to fend off any sort of closure activity. So since then they've been doing this, and their experience has been that they find that rather than just going out there when there is urgency, if you go out there when they're at different times and consistently, you develop relationships, and that's what advocacy really is about, is relationships. So we approached Rapid City and with the idea that maybe if we did this together, we did this jointly, we could speak with one voice for our 2 communities, for our state, for the business community, and not duplicate effort, be as efficient as possible, and also build relationships with our colleagues in Rapid. I think we kind of hit on all the marks. Whether or not we will be specifically impactful relative to the F-35 bed down is still yet to be determined. But we know that we are prepared now, and we know that if we do make it to the next round, we will be very well, the table will be very well set for our next round of advocacy on that particular issue. But beyond that, I think it's important that we develop our relationship with our sister city to the west, develop deeper and more meaningful relationships with policymakers in D.C., and I think that was accomplished. And so far, from everybody I've heard from, the reviews of the trip have been outstanding. So thank you, Council
Thank
Chair.
you, and thank you. I will send in the survey. That was directed
Yes,
at me.
please
Just for your information, when we talked with Senator Thune, we talked about pilot shortage, the growing pilot shortage that's happening in around the world, especially in the United States. Marketplace fairness having to do with sales tax on internet sales, and what's happening there with Congresswoman Noem. We talked about tax reform and clean water rules. We also had, she is a member of the Ways and Means Committee, and I forgot the representative's name, who's the chair. Brady was, she had him there with us, had some really a real interesting visit with him about a number of items and how they might get changed, et cetera, et cetera. So we had, Ways and Means Committee is very strong, probably the strongest committee in the U.S. House. And then when we were with Mike Rounds, with Senator Rounds, we talked about a lot about the overtime rules, the new overtime bill. You'll appreciate that, and how unfair they are to people out in small towns and small businesses, and then also some banking regulations that are proposed. So we not only hit the F-35 issue, but we hit a lot of other ones that would directly affect South Dakota. So I would urge any one of you, if you ever have a chance to go on one of these, to go. It's very worthwhile for everyone. Okay, sorry to take so long on that, but that was a trip that I thought needed a little bit of time to explain. Okay, presentations, storm drainage internal audit, Rich Oaksall.
Good afternoon, Council. Rich Oaksall, Internal Audit Office. This report was discussed at our July Audit Committee meeting, so I'm going to be brief today. I know we have a full schedule today. And first of all, this was the first internal audit that we've done of the Storm Drainage Fund. We've been around for about 10 years now, but this is the first time that we looked at the Storm Drainage Fund and the various activities associated with that. They've recently gone through a kind of a management change. There is now a manager for that fund. Before it was kind of there was money in the fund, but there wasn't necessarily an employee, that worked exclusively for storm drainage. They took employees from the Water Rec Division or the Engineering Division or the Street Department, and then did the activities that way. And now we have a full-time manager, Andy Berg, who's here today to help answer questions, and also Lance from the Engineer's Office to help answer questions that you might have. And by the way, that was in 2014 that Andy Berg became the manager of the division. The purpose of the division is to safely convey the stormwater runoff into the Big Sioux River. It's also to maintain the drainage infrastructure, and it's also to protect private property from flooding. And as part of the safe conveyance of stormwater, the city has what's called an MS4. That's a municipal separate storm sewer system, and that's a mouthful. That's why they always call it the MS4. And that is regulated and controlled by the state of South Dakota Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And they have a general permit that allows them to convey the runoff into the river. And the idea is that you want to keep that runoff you want to keep the pollutants and sediment out of that runoff as much as possible. So they have various ways of doing that. I was going to show you some pictures here, Jim, if you want to put up some of those pictures, just to give you an idea. This is Dan Dugan Park there. Behind it would be Lewis Drug there. This is near 41st. This is part of that infrastructure. There's a very large stormwater line that's going down the street over to the right that's conveying water to the river. And when there's, I think, too much water in the pipe, it'll come back and flood Dan Dugan Park when we have a major rain event. So this is part of that infrastructure that they have to maintain. Another picture there. A lot of times the storm runoff will end up in the river. This is downtown. And you can see that's a massive door there, and the storm runoff will end up in the river eventually. Do the next picture there. Make that just a little bigger. And there's maintenance crews during the year that are maintaining these storm drainage lines, and there's a picture in your report which you should have in front of you. They're a hard copy, but they have a truck that looks like a big vacuum cleaner. At least that's what it looks like to me. And they put this line into the storm drainage lines, and then the water is jetted, and that breaks up the debris, and then they pull that line backwards, and then the debris comes with it, hopefully, and then it gets put into the truck with that big vacuum cleaner device and then taken away. So that's very important to maintain that infrastructure to keep it functioning properly. Next picture. Another thing they do to maintain the infrastructure is they're continually videoing the storm drainage lines. So this is a picture inside the truck, and there's guys in the street. You can see through that window there, and they're dropping down into the camera down into the storm water line, and then they can see what the camera sees, and then this information can go to the engineer the next day. They have all that information there that they can see the condition of the lines, and they can be more proactive about the maintenance, and they can have a good idea what the conditions of the lines are. So that's one of the proactive things that Public Works has done in the last 5 years now. Could you put the report up, please? Okay. Okay, on page 7, I was going to show you this. The drainage fee revenue was increased by the City Council, previous City Council, for the years 2015 through 2017. The problem was the revenue in the fund wasn't keeping up with the needs for the infrastructure maintenance. And you can see there's a stormwater inlet. And Andy told me I was kind. I could have picked a much worse picture to show you some of the condition of some of these storm inlets that are in bad shape. They're trying to get a handle on it now with the increased revenue now, and there was 3 FTEs approved by a previous City Council, so they have more people now to help maintain these infrastructure. And then we concluded, as part of one of our audit recommendations, was to look at the revenue in the fund. And on Appendix 2 of your report, you can see the detail on the revenue as far as the fund balance the last 5 years and how the revenue and expenditures are coming in. So the increase that was approved by the City Council met the expectations of management. I think there was about a 10% increase after the first year. There's a lot more infrastructure now that the storm drainage fund has to maintain, including the levee system. And then they're also responsible for all the developing areas in town as far as putting in the detention ponds and retention ponds and all of that. So it gets to be pretty expensive, especially as the city gets bigger and bigger. We have to do the developing areas, and then we also have to maintain what we already have, and then address those areas in town too that have experienced a lot of flooding, like near Augustana on Colville Avenue, and those issues. So as far as the recommendations, we had 2 recommendations there on page 8. The first recommendation was to develop better ways of determining if those best management practices, what they call BMPs, are working. That's not going to be an easy task, but we want to make sure that what we're doing is really increasing, say, the water quality of the Big Sioux River, to make sure those, whatever we're doing to keep pollutants and sediment out of the river is actually working. And so we made that recommendation to come up with some better measures of effectiveness for the overall program and for individual elements of the program. And then the second one we suggested was to have develop written policies and procedures. The department, after the reorganization in 2014, it's still kind of getting going here, and so we just suggested for your major activities that you should have written policies and procedures. That's good internal control. As far as our conclusion, we concluded that they've definitely switched from being reactive to being proactive. We said the best management practices related to water quality are in place. However, we need to develop some ways of determining if the specific effectiveness of those BMPs. If that's really improving the overall water quality. And then on Appendix 1 there, it was kind of inconclusive. We got information from the state DE, NNR, as far as those two measures there of conductance and total dissolved solids in the Big Sioux River, wasn't really conclusive there. It was kind of up and down, except for the last 3 years. If you look at those two charts, from 2013 to 2015, there's a slight downward trend. So that's headed in the right direction. That's kind of a measure of how much is getting into the river, but we can do better. One thing that will help just the overall river quality is getting these buffer strips, especially upstream from us. If we can get more and more of those buffer strips that you've heard about in the news, those keep that farm runoff from getting into the river. They're like I think a 50-foot wide. Is that right about those? Yeah, just to try to keep the water quality better, especially upstream, because that's something that's really out of the control of the City of Sioux Falls. But it would certainly improve the regional water quality if we can get more and more of those buffer strips. So I wanted to keep it really short, and we did have a prolonged discussion at the audit committee, so I know many of you were there to hear that. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Lance or Andy as well. So
Questions? Yes, Councilor Staley.
Yes, thank you. And I guess this is going to be addressed to Andy. And I was able to go on that tour last week, which I would encourage all the council members, if you ever have an opportunity to do that. It was very beneficial. We saw 4 different areas where they're working on within the watershed area. And Andy, I know I brought this up when I came to the audit committee meeting, but would you just tell the whole council about your plans moving forward for adding things within our community to help citizens, so that the same approach that's being used, we're trying to get farmers to do, and ranchers or people who have cattle, keeping that area that will protect stormwater from going into the Big Sioux. Tell us about what we might be doing as in our community within the residences to help with that.
Certainly. Andy Berg, City of Sioux Falls Public Works. We have multiple things going on. One of the things that the city is doing in town is going with some native plantings in areas that are not needed to be mown, areas of parks that are not designated for recreation activities. And then we've also gone along the bike trail system in various park areas and converted those areas to a no-mow area, so that the area isn't mowed and acts as a good buffer between the bike trail and the river itself, similar to what we're doing up in the watershed. And then on the much more micro level with the individual homeowners, we are currently working with a consultant on developing some low-impact design standards that we're going to be hopefully implementing on new development, and will also allow for folks in existing developments to incorporate some of those measures. We don't have anything specific set yet, but things in other communities involve having curb cuts along your curb and gutter and allowing water, instead of continuing to flow down the street and into our pipes, to flow off into a boulevard area where we may have a depressed infiltration swale or rain garden type thing. So promoting more vegetation that promotes infiltration, and also ways to take flows off of the watershed up in the upper reaches of the watershed, rather than just trying to control it with a large pond at the bottom.
Other questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion to accept this. You're right, and that's right. This goes to there. So thank you, Rich. Thanks, Counselor. And with that, yes,
Mr. Chair,
Counselor.
I would move that the council move into executive session to consult with legal counsel or reviewing communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters per SDCL 125-2-3, and also preparing for contract negotiations or negotiating with employees or employee representatives per SDCL 125-2-4.
Second, Erickson.
And a second. We don't vote on this? We vote on this. Okay. All in favor?
We don't vote.
Roll call or just an all?
Well, we go into executive session.
Executive session.
Yes. We are in executive session. I would ask